Hello, and welcome back to our series on What If Jesus Was Serious by Skye Jethani. Today we're talking about chapter 22. And if Jesus was serious, then lust is a choice. So that's going to be an interesting topic today. So it
Yeah.
starts off in the part of the Sermon on the Mount from chapter 5, verses 27 and 28, where Jesus says, "You have heard the commandment that says, 'You must not commit adultery.' But I say, anyone who even looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart."
Yeah. And this is basically, I think, one of the things when we read it, we've got to really see that emphasis is everything. And we need to not just emphasize lust, we need to emphasize the with lust, because it really is about intent.
Yeah, and I think that's even in the actual original language that intent was there.
Hmm.
And I know some translations say with lustful intent. So
That's right.
again, it's something that is not just happening because you happen to see something that's obviously an object of desire for you, and it is just sort of happens in the moment. This is something where you're looking at someone with intent.
That's right. And so this is kind of, as this comment that Jesus is making on adultery is very much similar to that of murder, in that he's addressing things in the law, things that, what everyone probably know and agreed upon that is wrong. But he's really getting again to this heart, its root of the matter. Because really, the thing I think Jesus is saying is you've missed the point.
Yep.
And I could probably say we probably still, to a degree, missed the point.
I would agree with that. This kind of goes back to the chapter from last week where Jesus is talking about the Old Covenant and the New Covenant, the Old
That's right.
Testament and New Testament as we know it, where with the Old Testament we had what was called the law. And I mean, do not commit adultery is one of the big 10 commandments. But Jesus is saying that he requires something more than that. The law are guidelines, and it takes more than just our guardrails. It takes more than just rules to be a good person. So
Hmm.
then Jesus raises the bar with that phrase, "But I say," and that's where his new commandment comes into place, which is love one another.
That's
And
right.
what does love actually require us to do? And that may be simpler, but it's not easier.
That's right. So Sky would, he would talk about, that we live in a sex saturated society, and
Yep.
we think we do. And he said basically he points out two responses the church has given in all this, and the first one is condemnation, which he says is a simplification as well as an overreaction, and essentially just saying sexual immorality is bad, and you need to protect yourself immensely
From
because
any
it's lurking
desire.
around the corner, and
Yep.
you're just always in there. And then the accommodation, the second one, accommodation, affirms that cultural narrative, which we just, we agree that we think it's there.
Yep.
But basically says desires cannot be controlled and there's nothing we can do about it.
Yep. Just happens. You might as well go with it.
Yeah. And again, really the issue for both of those is it's really says, hey, you're a victim. The
Yep.
problem is out there. It's outside of us. And it just, it assumes this victimhood. And Jesus is saying, no, no, it's not outside of you.
Yeah,
It's
and I think
completely
that
inside you.
again, we the point of the kingdom of heaven is not behavioral modification.
That's
Not
right.
that I can get a check mark for following a rule. Jesus promised us a transformed heart, and that I think is getting to uh, the very point of what Jesus is trying to make here.
That's
I guess
right.
the other problem I have, I want to interject here is that
Mhm.
I the church by responding in either of these ways doesn't offer a healthy alternative to a sexual narrative, and I think
No.
that's a big mistake. Just to
Oh,
say that it's
huge.
either wrong or there's nothing you can do about it doesn't leave me with any alternatives that are good alternatives.
Well, that's right. And like truthfully, there's a lot of things being done. There's some books that have been written and that are trying to really correct the
Yep.
damage that actually has been done by some of this narrative. And it's a big deal. And
Hmm.
one of the things it is, and Scott McKnight says this in his commentary, that Jesus says, what I think a lot of these books are saying is essentially, Jesus isn't giving any excuse to males.
Yep.
He's really laying the full responsibility on men and expects them to be able to control their desires, which is really a lot about some of these books that are being written now is really pointing to that. It's like, hey, you've really abdicated responsibility, or the church allowed especially men to abdicate responsibility for this stuff. And Jesus is like, no, this is on you. This is in you. Maybe he's heard enough of the justifications, like, well, at least I'm not. The men were making, which is still the issue. And then Jesus is not blaming the women. He's not blaming the culture. He's not blaming something outside. He's just, this is an inner reality, and this is a choice.
And I think it is a big problem for men in particular. I mean, I'm sure it's a problem for women too, in some cases.
Absolutely,
but
it is.
being a man, I know this can be a big problem, and I've talked to other men about it. And it's a very distinct issue that we struggle with. And I really like what Scott says. We don't have an excuse. We have to learn self-control.
That's right. I think one of the things that I was thinking about when I was kind of reading this was like, we kind of make this all about adultery, which it is. But I think, I mean, I know how I can sometimes, with the idea of definition of adultery, that two people, one or both, are in a marriage relationship, and then they decide to come together because there's some sort of affection or whatever, lust involved in there. And really, if we look at adultery, a lot of what was happening at that time is much more, because it was even more man-centric than what we are still that way now. But then for sure, it was often about men taking advantage of women, whether it's breaking their commitments or using their power to take advantage of women that they want to be intimate with or whatever. And some, you might be saying like, well, at least I don't commit the act. But Jesus is saying, well, the foundation is there and you're just stoking the fire.
Yep.
And I really think that it's what we talk about here is not just purely about adultery in that sense, but really about the foundation of speaking into a predatory nature. Mm-hmm. Which is, and just sort of like, even if we don't act on that predatory nature, we're still feeding it, and it's immensely toxic.
Yep.
And we can't say that it's not an issue even today.
Yeah, and it becomes a slippery slope kind of thing. Just like anger doesn't always lead to murder, but murder always has its roots in anger.
Exactly. And what other damaging
the same thing applies
it's doing.
Here. Yeah.
Exactly. And it really is just, again, if we look at this idea of kind of lust, and going back to the idea you sort of, in the start of this conversation, going back to, it's about walking out in love. Simon Blackburn did this comparison of love and lust. He did a lot, but this thing that really stuck out to me. And this love pursues the good of the other with self-control, concern, reason, and patience. Lust pursues its own gratification, headlong, impatient of any control, and I love that because even our own, and immune to reason. And I think when I read that, it really speaks to, like, not just lust leading again to just any adultery, which it does, which it can. It's just, again, that sexual predatory nature that I really think Jesus is speaking into that just as much as again, adultery.
Absolutely. So to sum up what we've been talking about today is that having lustful intent towards another person is a very toxic thing, and it could lead to adultery. And what Jesus is saying, that just by doing that act itself is the same as adultery in your heart. So it is wrong, and we shouldn't do it. We are not we're not victims of lust. We choose it.
That's right. Well, I hope there's it's something you found interesting in the chapter as you read it, in our discussion. I know there's actually a lot of big things that we can go into this one, and we hope that they can lead into some great conversation, whether it's in your missional community, with some friends, wherever you might find yourself. There are some questions if you're following along and doing that, the questions along with that. And we encourage you to do that again with friends or hopefully with your missional community. Again, thank you for joining us in these moments, and have a great week.